Welcome to Bears on Tap, hosted by Kyle Juice Michalski, Quinten Krzysko, Sonny Verma, and the one and only Ron Luce. Bringing you all the news, analysis, and opinions on the charter franchise, Chicago Bears.
And we are back. We are Bears on Tap. My name is Quinten Krzysko. I'm joined by Sonny Verma and Ron Luce. And fellas, we are on to Minnesota. We are done talking about the loss. It is Tuesday. Mondays for crying, Tuesdays for moving on. We are on to the Minnesota Vikings. Starting with Sonny, how are you doing this evening, sir?
I'm a lot more optimistic. I was very sad the last 3 weeks at this point in time, but my mindset has changed. I've got different things that I'm focusing on for the rest of the season. And for that reason, let's just talk Bear football.
And I see Mr. Ron Luce, you got your branded cup right there. Always marketing. Love to see it.
I'm still sad, just as a fair warning to everybody, but I can contain my sadness for sake of this show. As you said, Q, we actually said it in the recap. We're on to Minnesota, and in tonight's case, I'm on to Minnesota because fuck the Vikings. That's why. So I'm excited to be back on the microphone with you boys. How's things?
Who in their right mind wears purple pants? Come on. Anyways, let's
better than brown pants.
Definitely better than brown pants or yellow pants for that matter. But I don't want to think about those.
Brown pants.
the worst kind of variations.
Let's start off with some news. Just looking at Ryan Bates got hurt during the game, so your starting guard this week will be up in the air. Kind of a question. I thought Jake Curran actually looked fairly decent at guard. Who knows, with the Minnesota Vikings knowing he's there, maybe they might plan a little differently. But I think you could see him, maybe Doug Kramer, maybe. I mean, I don't like that idea. But trying to think who else, if Bates does have to miss this next game. See, when the concussion protocol, it's always kind of iffy what that means for timeline. I assume Tevin is probably still out just because he was so banged up, and you figure if he was at all close, he was going to play because he's got that contract on the line. He was already playing through pretty much the whole laundry list of injuries. So you're pretty thin there. I'm not sure if you would trust Amagaji coming at guard, but so my assumption would be you're going to see Curran playing unless Ryan Bates gets off the injured reserve or off the concussion protocol before the game.
Yeah, I'd be very surprised to see him exit concussion protocol before the game. I agree with you, Q. I don't think Curran was too terrible, but as you very wisely mentioned, Brian Flores would be, I believe the term is licking his chops if Curran's starting at left guard this week. So, I guess we're going to find out who's playing come Sunday. At least we have a few days. Kind of the fun thing about us doing these previews, right? We don't have the information of injury reports yet, so we get to kind of speculate and kind of utilize some sort of foreshadowing, I guess, for lack of a better term, rather than just having to be factual. And then we can, like you said, Q, we can react and I guess cry about it later in the week, depending how things go.
Yeah, technically we can't be wrong.
You're right. We cannot.
Yeah, these all guesses at this point.
It's like being a weatherman.
And then the Bears, they worked out a bunch of safeties today. I assume that's related to Jaquan Brisker being out, but so they ended up signing Adrian Colbert of Hard Knocks fame, which I'm sure Ryan Poles is happy about that. But what do you guys think? Do you think Colbert's gems can bring the right energy to the Bears?
They're going to need his gems.
Yeah, I hope we're not counting on it.
I mean, so I think this makes sense. I've been critical. I was critical last show about Elijah Hicks' ability to really fill in as a starter. So I'm all for seeing a veteran signed. I kind of like that they brought in Terrell Edmonds, Tremaine Edmonds' brother, but evidently they like Colbert more than him. Terrell was a former first-round pick of the Steelers. I think that can kind of play the same style that Brisker did, where Colbert feels like more of a free safety, more of a center fielder. So again, I don't know. Again, I'm sitting here wondering, like, Matt Eberflus clearly prefers to have two deep half safeties. Why did they draft Jaquan Brisker if that's what he wants? Like, it's just very bizarre to me. It doesn't matter. It's nothing to be like overly critical of 3 years after the fact, but it's just like, if this is what you want, why didn't you get what you want?
Yeah, I think some of that has to do just with Brisker's raw ability. I think because of just how good of a football difference maker he is at the safety position. I think they were willing to say, hey, maybe we can get him to be even a twinge below league average in terms of a coverage safety, and then let him utilize that physicality and that instinct around the line of scrimmage to be a playmaker. But I agree with you, Q. I think largely you kind of see it based on what they roll out. And I think with, obviously with Kevin Byard replacing Eddie Jackson, like they really want those guys that can play the deep halves of the field. And who knows, maybe that benefits this defense a little bit, especially because I think Colbert might be a slight upgrade over Elijah Hicks at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I say slight in the kindest facet humanly possible. Neither of them are Jaquan Brisker, but yeah, it's certainly an interesting observation, Q, that I agree. Maybe there is something to it. Maybe Coach Eberflus was, that first year bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and I can make him work in my defense. And in hindsight, they're like, yeah, he's a good player, but like we can't have him cover half the field.
Yeah, like they've clearly made it work, but it's just an odd fit when every time he's out, they're going back to the roamer. And Sonny, did you have something to say before I cut you off there so kindly?
No, all good. It's just one of those where I took a look at the lineup, that Minnesota's rolling out. It's like it's all eyes on deck, so it may just make sense to bring in someone who's already familiar with, what the calls might be, and just try to create as least amount of friction as possible on such short notice.
That's a great point. I think that's probably very valid. The guy who was with you all training camp and went through all your game plans or all your season plans and how you wanted to deploy things, that makes a lot of sense. Now, one last thing before we get into the game preview. Starting with Sonny, do you think it's possible for Caleb Williams to throw for 230 some yards and 2 touchdowns this week?
It's absolutely possible.
Well, then you're looking at your Chicago Bears rookie record holder for both touchdown and passing yards.
That's right. Oh, I forgot about that.
He's right on the verge of it. This week he has a 232 yards, 2 touchdowns. He breaks both records. So that's something to be on the lookout for this week. And that's not exactly a small task against the Brian Flores defense.
So let me ask you guys a question before we get the real show started. I know we're already 8 minutes in, but did you guys see ESPN rank Caleb as the worst of the rookie quarterbacks this year?
Of course they did.
This is one of those where are we just biased because he's our quarterback, or is the national media being too harsh on Caleb, or like is it in the middle somewhere? Because again, I know I've acknowledged he had a rough first couple of games, and the previous 3 to this last game, he wasn't great, but everything is still there. Everything I saw last Sunday was arguably, as excited as I've been all season long. So when I saw that list, I was just like, what?
I mean, according to our comments, Caleb is the GOAT. So, but truly, if you're looking at the numbers, looking at the stats, EPA per play is such a huge stat for quarterbacks, even though it is a team offense stat. Caleb's had the worst stats among them. Like, if we're being frank, as much as I think there's a lot to see in Caleb's stats, and I think there's a lot to see beyond the numbers, and a lot to see with, you look at the 2 different styles that guys are being asked to play. I think Caleb has done more than some of these other guys, but the results are the results. Bo Nix is leading a playoff a team that looks like it's going to have a shot to make the playoffs and has more yards, more touchdowns. Like Jaden Daniels has won Rookie of the Week over and over and over, and Drake May has done nothing but look good since he took the starting job. Now, if we want to get more technical with it, Drake May has also thrown by far the most turnover-worthy plays of any of them. Caleb hasn't thrown an interception in 4 weeks, and I think the coaching effect is real when you're talking about Sean Payton coaching Bo Nix and the stuff that he is able to get him into versus what Caleb's been doing here. It's two very different things that you're looking at. So I'm not shocked that ESPN did that, one, for the clickability of it, and two, because you can justify it. So you got clickability, you got a very clickable thing that's easily justifiable. It makes sense to me that they do that.
All right, Ron, you heard it. Q's off the Caleb bandwagon. Confirmed.
I tend to lean in agreement of it's easy as ESPN to just generate clicks. I think anybody that actually has watched football understands the ineptitude of this Bears offense for a large portion of the last month, up until legitimately Sunday. At least it was what it kind of felt like. You know, I think too with a lot of the other guys, at least more notably maybe Drake May and Jaden Daniels, I think they're running a much more simple scheme. And as a result, I think you're going to see a harder sophomore slump from them than perhaps a Caleb Williams. I think the one that to me stands out is Bo Nix. And the reason for that, I think a lot of people forget Bo Nix has played a lot of football. The dude was in college for like 9 years. Now that's a little bit of, I understand that's a little over dramatic, but nonetheless, right? Like when you see that much football, you are just naturally a step ahead of everybody else. And I think the Sean Payton effect is real, right? I think he needs a certain kind of quarterback to make his system work, as we clearly saw with the differentiation between a Drew Brees and a Russell Wilson. But Bo Nix was that guy. If we're coming at this from like a fantasy standpoint, I had Bo Nix all over my boards. And I feel really freaking smart about it in my dynasty leagues, having him and Patrick Mahomes and CJ Stroud on the same roster. But, you know, I think from a talent perspective, you do still see what Caleb has that a lot of these guys just don't. And I think as he continues to learn, I think as he continues to progress, I hope this Thomas Brown offense continues to look anything similar to as what it did on Sunday. At least that makes them competitive in games, even if they are losing. I think you're going to start to see that narrative turn quickly because now there's actually a competent offensive scheme being deployed at the hands of Caleb Williams versus what was happening before.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. I think there's truly, I do not know if any rookie quarterback has put on tape what Caleb Williams did this past weekend. I don't like if we're just going off eye test. He's the top guy. Like he's still the top guy in my mind. But
he's also got a set of cojones that I don't think any of those other rookie quarterbacks have. And you saw it right on that fourth down play that they converted to Roshan on what was it, 4th and 2. He's walking at the sideline screaming at Eberflus to go for it. And like not giving him an option. He's like, go for it. Go for it. I need the play. We're going for it. You don't have a say here. Like probably most of the other guys, maybe Bo Nix, because we saw that fire kind of come out with Sean Payton a little bit earlier in the season. None of those other guys are doing that. Like that's very much a Caleb knows he's the top dog and he's kind of showing it and he's got that moxie about him that to me makes him the biggest difference maker, right? I think everybody can sit here and argue, yeah, Aaron Rodgers was a super talented quarterback, but was he really better than Peyton Manning or Tom Brady? I don't know. But he had that killer instinct, that swag that a lot of quarterbacks don't. And that's why he was so great for so long. I think we kind of got a taste of Caleb's swag really for the first time all season. And I think that's part of the reason it's so infectious this week leading up to the Vikings, where Sonny, like you said, right, your priorities of what the season has become have changed. And I think it's the case with a lot of Bears fans right now. We want to keep seeing that version of Caleb that we saw on Sunday. And as long as you keep seeing that, I think everybody's going to feel confident no matter what the wins and losses are the rest of the way.
In the comments, we got Jay saying Caleb will win at minimum 4 Super Bowls. So it's hard to compete with that.
Jay, I hope you're right.
Yeah, Jay's got it on lockdown. But anyways, let's get into this game. Minnesota Vikings are coming to Soldier Field. I believe it's a noon game on Sunday. Yeah, noon game. So Soldier Field is looking like high of 49 degrees. So might be a little colder than that at noon, like probably in the 40s. No rain. Wind gusts up to 14 miles an hour. That's not high for Chicago, so that's somewhat normal, I feel like. Last week's it was in the 20s, so 14 is manageable. Might be actually the best throwing day Caleb Williams has got at Soldier Field so far this season, outside of maybe week 1, which was not a good, didn't end up being good, but it'll be nice to see him not have to fight the wind all game like he has almost every other home game. Not that it's been a big issue for him. He's actually been pretty impressive at breaking through the wind and understanding what club to use at which point. But I wonder if this might be a week where we're able to see some deep balls finally start landing. With you take out some of the wind, we saw how close he was in this past game. Truly, the one that he almost hit to Rome was the first time all year I felt like one was truly catchable that wasn't just, like wide ass open. Like the ones that he has hit were like no one within 5 yards of the guy. Mm-hmm. That one to Rome this past week felt like the first one where it's like, okay, he's giving his guy a chance this time, which was just refreshing to see and hopefully a sign of things to come. But with that being said, let's take a look at this Vikings roster and just talk about it a little bit overall. Like, we're looking at the stats here. Vikings are 10th in offense, or on offensive yards, 4th in points, but only 13th in EPA per play and 14th in success rate. But defensively, they're kind of the opposite. 15th in yards, 10th in points, 1st in EPA per play, and 1st in success rates. The advanced metrics like their defense more than the traditional, and vice versa for the offense. Sonny, what comes to mind for you about this Vikings team when you just see it all on paper like this? Like, what's your thoughts about their strengths and weaknesses?
So I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's a diehard Minnesota Vikings fan, as I was kind of prepping for this show, and he kind of echoed what you just kind of said. Their record is a lot better than what the numbers kind of show that it should be. Minnesota Vikings season is they just end up winning. It doesn't always look pretty. They don't look like they're a dominant team, but at the end of the game, they score more points than the opponent, which, by the way, fantastic strategy. Something that, we should kind of look into more often as well. I mean, they're talented, of course. You have arguably the best wide receiver in the game, and you have 3 of the toughest pairings of rushers that we're going to be facing all year long. But again, having only 2 losses, I don't know if they're that good, but ultimately the main goal is to win the game, right? And that's what they keep doing.
Ron, what about you? What are your thoughts, your general thoughts about this team that the Bears are playing Sunday?
I mean, I think offensively they're a much better version than they were a year ago, right? We saw some of that struggle from the offense. Obviously, Kirk getting hurt and the quarterback carousel that was with guys like Josh Dobbs and Nick Mullins and the same level of Minnesota Viking quarterback names that we associate with guys like Caleb Haney and so on and so forth. But they're an improved group on offense this year. I think just the play of Darnold, I really think Aaron Jones was a shot in the arm that they needed at the tailback position after kind of a rough season a year ago, and obviously the departure of Dalvin Cook and whatnot. But defensively, they play bigger than they actually are. And a lot of that is the Flores defense. When you have the guys that, A, understand how to make it work, and B, are still talented. Like, I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, they're a dog shit defense and they just get by because of scheme. That's not at all the case. But they have kind of an old on tap Sportsnet expression from our friend Schwartzy. Kind of all the aces in the right places is what they got going on defense right now. They got the right personnel in the right roles, and they execute it nearly flawlessly. I mean, they are a really good defense because of how they run the scheme. I look at this matchup and I go, one of 2 things is going to happen. Either Caleb's going to maybe struggle a little bit because it's going to be a lot of stuff he probably hasn't seen, or we're going to get a recreation of the Bears Monday night game against the Vikings a year ago where every single play was a screenplay. And I really would rather have the former than the latter because I don't think I can withstand a game of 35 screens. I physically don't think I can stomach that as a football fan. So
again,
I'm kind of a I'm kind of excited to see how Caleb handles this Brian Flores scheme and kind of how Thomas Brown attacks the scheme as well. I think there's kind of, as Sonny stated again earlier, like there's a lot of underlying storylines that I think we're going to look for the rest of the way, and that's one of them, at least for this week, that's a little more dialed in and narrowly focused. I kind of want to see the chess match of a wily, old school, longtime DC against kind of the fresh, little swaggy, fiery OC that has now taken over for the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And that's something that I want to get to a little bit more in our keys to the game, is that chess match. But with all that being said, I mean, I'll give my take on the Vikings. I thought this team was going to be bad. I thought this team was going to be bad this year. And I mean, we had, for anyone who didn't catch this in the offseason, we had Arif Hassan on the podcast come on and preview the Vikings for us. And, he thought they were going to be kind of middle of the pack in a lot of ways. Like, they just have a good winning culture, but they lacked for talent all over the defense, and the offensive line had some questions, and he thought they could be leaky. But what he said was, as long as you get Justin Jefferson changing the defense, you're going to be able to score points, which I generally agree with him on. But this team has blown me away with how disciplined they are defensively, how strategic they are defensively. Like, I knew Brian Flores was an utter chaotic sicko whose players just play to a T what he asked them to do, extremely disciplined. I didn't think they could pull off what they're pulling off right now. Like, they are playing such a disgusting brand of football, and disgusting. I say disgusting in the best possible way of, like, you're not allowed to do that, but they're doing it. Like, the way that their safeties and their linebackers are just like gnats flying around a fruit bowl, and just like you have no idea where they're going next, but they know where they're going, even though they don't seem like they do. It's awesome to watch. It's actually, I think, really similar to what the Bears saw against the Cardinals. I think Jonathan Gannon's defense does a lot of similar stuff to what Flores does. They're both very unique in their own ways, but in how chaotic and how different the looks are constantly, there's some similarities there. So I do think it's a plus that Caleb and the Bears have already seen that, even if they didn't have a lot of success against it. But let's move into our first segment here, and we'll keep going on this Vikings roster.
The baddest man.
All right, starting with Ron. Who is the baddest man on the Minnesota Vikings offense?
I can't go with the easiest one here. I almost want to leave the layup for somebody else. Because I know that I know that everybody knows where I would want to go with this. But I'm going to give love to a guy that I don't think gets enough appreciation in this Vikings offense, and that's Aaron Jones. That dude has, first off, tortured the Bears for the better part of a decade now, and has really stepped in nicely into this Minnesota offense. Again, the Kevin O'Connell effect is real, and you've got an older running back who's still having a ton of success, both as a pass catcher and as a runner. And yeah, maybe the individual stat numbers aren't fantastic week in and week out like they were sometimes in Green Bay, but he is still such a difference maker. And as we saw a week ago, the Bears defense get gashed at times in the run game on certain drives. He's a guy that can absolutely still make a difference in this game. Gosh forbid, as Scott said here, if Jalen Johnson can lock down the aforementioned that we're all referencing here is probably the realest, the baddest man of the roster. I think that's, he's still a menace that can do a lot of damage to the Bears and has done a lot of damage to the Bears. So maybe it's a little bit of my own PTSD that's conning this decision at hand, but I got to give some love to a guy like Aaron Jones.
Sonny, where are you going with your baddest man on offense?
I'm taking the layup. Appreciate it, Ron. I mean, you're talking about, top 10 player in the entire NFL, a guy who single-handedly, changes the game plan of, it doesn't matter what the talent around him looks like. He's just that good. And so, Jalen Johnson didn't have a very good game last week. And so, do they put him up against Jefferson? I think that's going to be a matchup to watch, but they've got other weapons too now. but the other weapons don't matter when you have Justin Jefferson on the team.
Yeah. I mean, like I alluded to a little before, Arif Hassan in our preview in the offseason was talking about when you really dig into the numbers, you find that Justin Jefferson defenses cannot play the Vikings the way they play other teams because of Justin Jefferson. He demands so much attention that just opens everybody else up. Like he's the best receiver in football. I don't think it's close. Like it's that simple, and he's that good. Like you'll need Jalen Johnson do everything he can against me. Probably need a safety over the top at the same time. There's not many receivers you have to say that about with Jalen Johnson. He's one of the only ones. Now, I would love to go Christian Darrisaw here because I love Christian Darrisaw. He's a heck of an offensive tackle, but you know what? He's on injured reserve. I don't think Cam Robinson's on the same level. I like Brian O'Neill because I'd still like to go offensive tackle, but I can't quite put him in baddest man territory. He's like the perpetual really good, but not game changer level player in my mind. And man, I'll just get heartburn if I go Jordan Addison because there's one other guy who deserves it more. And as much as I hate to say it, because I thought he was the second best tight end on his team in college at Iowa, I thought he was the second best NFL prospect at tight end. And I still believe that he is not that good of a receiver. I think he's just a good blocker, and that makes a big difference when you're in a play action based offense. I'm talking about TJ Hawkinson. TJ Hawkinson is a true Y tight end. He's what we hope Cole Kmet can be, like with more usage. Like I think Cole Kmet can get near that level that TJ Hawkinson is at, but so much of what Hawkinson does is dependent on the run game and on his run blocking, opening things up in the passing game for him by, giving that deception as he's getting into routes and being able to find open space because of the way he's attacking straight at a guy smaller than him. Like he's just about to steamroll him as a blocker. There's a lot of that in TJ Hawkinson's game. And I thoroughly expect him to be going hard at Tremaine Edmonds for a lot of this game in run blocking scenarios, and then using that to find openings. He just got back from injured reserve a few weeks ago, coming off a torn ACL. So that's why his number here is pretty rough at 53%. In the 53rd percentile tight ends. A lot of that's just because he hasn't played many snaps this year, but he's back on the field for them, and he is a key within their offense for what they want to do. And truly, he's my third option. I would have gone Justin Jefferson and Aaron Jones first. Those are the two guys who I'm the most worried about in this game. But Sonny, defensively, who's your baddest man on the Minnesota Vikings?
So there's like 3 or 4 guys you can pick here. The one I'm going to go with is Blake Cashman. His return last week is basically what elevates them from a very good defense to a very, very, very good defense. And I think, just his presence, again, now you're talking about quarterbacks being attacked from all sides and all angles. And Cashman was my pick.
Okay, Ron, where are you going with it?
I can't help but think every time you say the baddest man on the Minnesota Vikings, I think about the new man on the Minnesota Vikings, and I start thinking Lizzo in my head.
Yeah.
But with that in mind, this guy is a new man on the Minnesota Vikings. I really like Andrew Van Ginkel. I liked what he was in Miami. I think he's a painfully underrated both pass rusher and just true linebacker. I think he's one of the few guys in the NFL that you kind of get a best of both worlds scenario with, especially in this style of defense that they play with a true edge rushing linebacker and a guy that's also going to drop in coverage. He is a difference maker, man. And I'll tell you what, you could definitely tell that was a Brian Flores targeted player from their very little time together, but time together in Miami when he became available, because he has looked like an absolute rock star in your numbers stated here in your models, Q. He's been a difference maker. I really think he's another reason why it feels like this defense has taken a little bit of another step forward, as Sonny alluded to with a guy like Cashman. I think Van Ginkel has the same kind of reaction. And how about losing Danielle Hunter and DJ Wonham and replacing him with Greenard and Van Ginkel, and it feels like not even missing a beat. I mean, Van Ginkel's a bad dude, so he's my pick as best man.
Yeah, I think Van Ginkel was where I was kind of planning to go because I figured he might fall under the radar, and I love Van Ginkel. I love watching this dude play football. He was a monster for Flores in Miami, and then And then Flores left and he kind of fell to the wayside. Like he was still fine, but he wasn't the constant, just like constantly wreaking havoc the way he was with the Dolphins when
He became
Flores
a
was
rotation
there.
player.
Yeah. And then he comes to Minnesota. He becomes that dude again. Like he has 2 touchdowns this year. Just like wild stuff for a
Crazy.
defensive end, for an edge rusher, I guess, linebacker, defensive end hybrid. But I have to go with Jonathan Grenard here because he's the dude on this defense, right? He's the guy who has 51 pressures, 7 sacks right now. Like Van Ginkel's got 8 sacks, but only 27 pressures, only half the pressures. Grenard is the best edge rusher on this team, and he needs to be respected as such. And they're gonna scheme up ways to get him one-on-ones because he's the most skilled edge rusher here. I wasn't that high on Grenard coming into this season. I thought last year he was kind of a product of Will Anderson. I think he's proven me wrong. I think that I do think he's helped out by Flores' scheme as like he's the key guy to get one-on-ones, which kind of worked similarly in Houston for very different reasons. Like Will Anderson helped him get one-on-ones there. But I do need to mention one other guy because this is one of my favorite non-Bear players in football, and that's Harrison Phillips. Harrison Phillips is a monster of a nose tackle with a sleek mustache and wears white gloves like a magician. And whenever he gets a sack, he just has the best celebration with like his gloves just always stand out. This dude's a monster. I think he held the bench press record at the combine for years, out of Stanford, I believe. But he's been one of my favorite non-Bears in football for years. He's just so strong in the middle and so hard to move. Like he cannot stand up to double teams really easily. And I think he's a really key cog in this defense, even though the numbers don't reflect it. Now, let's move on to the next item here.
The nicest man.
Sonny, who's the nicest man on the Minnesota Vikings offense?
I mean, the numbers tell me obviously the right guard, but I have 4 numbers for you guys that I wanted to kind of talk about. The yards per carry for the last 4 games for the Vikings. The Rams, 2.9. Colts, 4.2. Jaguars, 2.9. Tennessee Titans, 2.5. That running game is just not working out. Obviously, Ron brought up Aaron Jones earlier, a Bears killer, not someone that our fan base is unfamiliar with, but they seem to be struggling with that offensive line. They're trying to figure out the running game, but they haven't found it yet. And so I think if there's one facet that we want to kind of focus our attention on, try to force them to run the ball, I think we might have some success.
Ron, what are your thoughts?
I was actually going to kind of build off of that in a way. I think Aaron Jones can be a difference maker in this offense, but we've learned everything we need to learn about how the Minnesota Vikings feel about Ty Chandler. They went out and traded for Cam Akers to supplement your carries behind Aaron Jones. Like, he went from this guy that showed so much promise coming into last year, and it was his backfield to take over. And then even last year, they went out and kind of scrap heaped their way through the season with different tailbacks. Again, like Sonny alluded to, right? I think we all see the big glaring red blob in the middle of the screen. But I can't help knowing what I know about Chandler, and he has to be highlighted here. And probably a big reason why Minnesota's had to invest so many assets in that running back position over the last 2 seasons now is because the lack of production out of a guy from like Ty Chandler.
Yeah, that's a good call out because, Aaron Jones isn't necessarily the workhorse back. Like he's a little more up there in age. Even in Green Bay, he was always supplemented by A.J. Dillon and others where, like, he's not your every single down back. He's just your most threatening back. So there will be chances for other guys, whether that be Ty Chandler, whether that be Cam Akers, but they're guys who probably don't scare you that much. And ultimately here, I mean, I'm going where Sonny went. I'm going on the interior. I'm probably, it's somewhere between like Risner, Bradbury, and Brandel. Like, Risner hasn't been a starter this year. He just started his first game of the year last season because they decided to bench Ed Ingram because he's been that rough for them. So it's hard to say that he is the weakest link to me when he's barely played, but his track record is as a guy who's a solid pass protector and a rough run blocker. So that fits the narrative, especially like in Garrett Bradbury, better run blocker, doesn't really have the anchor, doesn't really have the size to hold up against nose tackles, against defensive tackles. So I think between those two is where I'm attacking if I'm the Bears. The right guard and the center, I'm really testing those two's ability. And even Brandel, you can throw in there. Like Sonny said, I think it's kind of bunch that interior together and you say, you can attack this. And I think Cam Robinson at left tackle is a guy who you can get. Montez Sweat got, or I'm sorry, not Montez. The Bears' other defensive ends, DeMarcus Walker, got him a few times when he was with the Jaguars earlier this year, right? Like Walker had a good game against him. So that's a matchup to watch for me because Cam Robinson he's fine in this league, but he's beatable. And the Bears did beat him earlier this year. One of the rare players the Bears will see 3 times this season, actually. But moving on to the defense, Sonny, who's your nicest man on the Vikings defense?
So from what I've gathered, obviously, when the Vikings blitz, they have a lot of guys to blitz with. But when it comes to the secondary, if you force them to make a play, they're very turnover reliant. Like they need those turnovers in order to make the big plays. I don't know, like if we went individual by individual, like that unit is necessarily as talented as the other ones on the team. I'm looking at the grades now. They all seem very pretty much at the same level. So again, I'm going to kind of cheat again, if you gentlemen don't mind, and just kind of say the secondary in general, as long as the offensive line can, I mean, of course, easier said than done, but as long as the offensive line can kind of hold that blitz at bay, I think you can take advantage of the secondary.
Ron, where's your head at for this one?
I'm going to call out a former Bear just because I think it's fun, in Jonathan Bullard. I think the interior defensive line outside of maybe Phillips is probably where you would like to attack this team. Now, if there's anything, Q, that I've learned, because I'm having really bad deja vu right now, because I feel like we've been on these preview shows and been like, well, the Bears can attack the interior defensive line because that's where they suck the most, and then they don't. So I'm not saying that's where the Bears should attack, but I'm saying I think that helps in the sense of you have more manageable interior pass rushers. There is no DJ Wonham kicking inside this year like there was last year. I think that gave them a huge edge when he bumped inside and almost became a DeMarcus Walker, like rushing from the inside, maybe even a little bit bigger and stronger and more of a bull rusher than finesse. I think if you're gonna keep him at bay, especially with a lot of question marks for the Bears at left guard this week, I think that's the place that you look and you go, okay, good. Maybe we do get a little bit of relief here because we're going to need the big boys on the outside. We're going to need the big boys in terms of, potentially Roshan Johnson picking up blitzes, especially from a guy like Pace, who is a notorious blitzer in this scheme. That's where you hope that cushion plays into the favor of the Bears' offensive line woes.
Yeah, that's a great point, especially the part where it's like in the past we've said this and they really couldn't do it. So you got to kind of adjust there. Now, for me, I mean, I had an idea here because I was going to say, if I'm the Bears and I'm looking at this and I get Stephon Gilmore in man coverage, I'm going at him every time. Last year, the Cowboys in the playoffs, Green Bay destroyed them because Stephon Gilmore couldn't hold up in man coverage anymore. And I think if you still get that, you do it. But I just pulled up their numbers and they don't run a lot of man coverage. So you're only going to get a few chances at that a game.
I wonder why.
Because they're running I wonder why. Because they got Shaq Griffin and Stephon Gilmore on the boundaries. Like those guys are not, they're up there in age. They can't cover in man coverage very well anymore, but they're smart in zone coverage and they know their rules and they get to where they need to be. I think for this one, oh man, this is tough, honestly, because I look at this defensive roster. I see gaps and talent all over it, but they make the middle of the field so tough for you to read. So it's got to be hammering zones outside, making a combination of Harrison Smith and Stephon Gilmore closing space. Both guys are not as fast as they used to be. They lost a step. You need to find the zones in between them, or that can be Shaq Griffin and Harrison Smith as well. But you need, if they're running concepts that have cushions between those two zones, you find that and you attack it, because that's where you're going to be able to find space that is not accounted for in my mind. But moving off the roster and back towards the Bears section, let's get to our next segment.
Keys to victory.
I love it when there's three of us on this, because we can each just give one, and it's beautiful. Sonny, what's your key to victory for the Bears this week?
All right, I'll go first on this one. So I could go something Caleb related, but you know what? I missed the post game last Sunday, so I didn't really get to talk about this. But I love that they just let DJ Moore have the ball and let him make plays. And when you let DJ Moore make plays, that makes Caleb, his life, so much easier. That gives more opportunities to Roma Dunze. So same thing. Don't try to fix anything that doesn't need to be fixed. DJ's arguably your best offensive player. Give him the ball. Let him make some plays.
To your point with that, because I was thinking something along those lines too, where it's like, you're more talented than them. You have DJ Moore lined up against any of these guys, any of these secondary players, and you're saying, I trust DJ to win that. You have Roma Dunze against them. I trust Rome to win that. So just getting the ball in their hands and letting them go makes sense. That doesn't mean pull the Luke Getsy and do 40 screen passes in one game, but like, there's more creative ways to do it. So I like that one a lot. Ron, where are you going for your key to the game?
Manage the blitz. Now, the blitz is going to get home. They're going to win. I know Scott from Iowa was asking earlier, what's the over-under on number of sacks given up in this week against that blitz? They're going to get to Caleb. Just plain and simple. They're going to. They get to everybody. It doesn't make a difference who's they're playing on a week-to-week basis. It's limiting and managing the blitz, especially up the middle. I think if they're going to bring pressure off the outside, you trust Caleb to get the football out quick enough where the damage isn't done necessarily from those guys coming off the edge. Rather, it's the worlds of pace or a Greener getting an inside loop on a stunt. It's things like that are going to really get to them, and that's where the blitz is going to come through and make a big difference. So you can leave everything to the outside and force them to come from depth in order to get to you on the blitz. That's going to give Caleb the opportunity, especially if there's those soft windows in the coverage, as you mentioned, Q, or maybe they do run a little bit of man because they have to. Then you can get it and build off of Sonny's point. Get it to your playmakers and let things happen. But you have to manage the blitz. They're going to get home. You just got to accept that fact. But 4 sacks is a lot different than 9, as we saw against the Patriots. Just manage the blitz and try to keep Caleb as upright as humanly possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big spot in this game, to be able to do that, to be able to pass off stunts, pass off pressures, the O-line's ability to have an idea of what might be coming and be prepared for it, because I'll tell you that they could spend all week studying the different pressure packages they're going to see and still not feel like they know it. But having an idea on each down, I think, goes a long way. Now, for me, for my key to the game, I'm trying to think of the way to word it. It's something like, I need Caleb to show that moxie in this game. He needs to be prepared, because what Brian Flores does that makes him so difficult, he's not playing chess with your offensive coordinator. He's not playing chess with your head coach, your play caller, whoever it might be. He's playing chess with your quarterback. He makes your quarterback have to play chess with him, with no one else able to help him. So Caleb needs to be up for the task this week with that. He needs to understand that, yes, the film study is very important, and what I see, the tendencies, that matters. But this guy's insane. This guy breaks his tendencies every single week. So I need to know that. I need to be prepared for that. And I can't be shocked when I see something that I've never seen before. I need to be ready for it. I need to have answers, solutions. I need to think on my feet. That's what Flores does. He makes your quarterback think on his feet. And that's something I think Caleb's good at. But he needs to be in the right headspace to do it this week for the Bears to win this football game. And let's go back through some of the comments here just to touch on them before we get to our predictions. So we got Seth in the comments saying to put Sweat on Robinson. I like the idea of that. I don't know if they'll do it because they've had Sweat just over the right tackle all season, but it's a great matchup for him. So I'd like to see it. What do you guys think?
I'm for trying a bunch of different things. I think being different, right? Almost playing kind of Flores' game to Flores' team, I think makes a lot of sense. Obviously, as we saw a week ago, they didn't even bother to blitz a guy like Jordan Love. I hope they get away from that. I don't know what it is about the Packers that makes them think that they shouldn't blitz. That happened at the end of last season as well, and I still don't understand why assuming the same thing's going to work again when it didn't work is anyway. I hope they could get creative and maybe you give Sweat some of those opportunities because I feel like we're still waiting on that one game from Sweat this year where he really just takes over the game. I don't think we've gotten that quite yet from him.
Yeah, for me, it's like I understand the idea of moving Sweat, but keeping Sweat on one side also gives the other guys a better chance to help out because otherwise they get nullified by the right tackle's name, O'Neal. So I can see the point, but I agree with you, Ron. He's at what I think 3.5 sacks this year. Not that he's ever been a huge sacks guy, but I'm waiting for that game where the post game, immediately we're like, oh, that was the Montez Sweat game.
And I think he had a pretty good game against Minnesota last year, if I remember correctly. He really caused some problems for them, if I remember right. Let's see. I'm going to pull it up. And I know he had at least one sack that was pretty nasty against them. And it was against a quarterback who was highly questionable. I forget who was even, if that was.
I believe it was still Dobbs.
Yeah, Dobbs. That's the name I was looking for. But let's see. Did he? I'm not even seeing the game in here. Oh, well, it doesn't matter. Oh, that's because I was looking at the Washington games. Yeah, he had 2 sacks and 7 pressures against Minnesota last year. I'm not sure if O'Neal was playing, but I know he primarily played right side last year. So if O'Neal was out there, I mean, he had some pretty good success against him anyways. But let's get to, or actually, I want to touch on one thing because I forgot to say it during the nicest man. Sam Darnold. Sammy Darnold. He hasn't been he's been surprising this year, but especially lately, he's been throwing a lot of turnover worthy plays. He gives you the chance to take the football away. I think he's 3rd in the NFL right now in turnover worthy plays, 4th or 5th in interceptions, 10 picks on the year, 15 turnover worthy plays. This dude is a play action merchant right now. If you can take play action away from Sam Darnold, he will give you the football. It's as simple as that in my mind. And that's something that I think we've seen for years. I don't think he's a guy who's highly changed. I think he's gone into an offense that is really helping him a lot and doing a lot of stuff for him with a strong run game, with Aaron Jones being such a beast back there, and with Justin Jefferson at his side. But if you can get them out of the play, if you can stop the run, and this is a constant theme, I feel like, but if you can stop the run, force them out of play action, it's a constant theme in the NFL right now. You can make their quarterback have to play quarterback, and that's something that Sam Darnold isn't great at. But let's get to our predictions. Sonny, how do you see this game going?
I mean, you talk about Sam Darnold, right? And this team is 8-2. And as I said before, I don't know if they're necessarily 8-2 on paper. I think they win the game at the end, which is ultimately what matters. I really like what I saw from the Bears last week. I'm very optimistic. I love what Caleb did. I loved what the new offensive coordinator, just what our offense looked like. It looked like it was alive for the first time since that bye week. I think these blitzes are going to be a little too much for Caleb to overcome. I don't think we win this particular week. I'm going to say 24-13 Minnesota.
Ron, what do you think?
I think it's going to be a little closer than that. I'm going to hopefully err on the side of caution and pick the Vikings to win just so that I get karma to spit in my face, because I think that's what we all want to happen. I think it's going to be a closer game, though, and I don't think it's going to be as crazy high scoring either. I've got this game somewhere kind of in that like 20-17 range, where it's probably going to come down to a kick, which my PTSD just went off too, I promise. And, hopefully they can get it done. I want the Bears to win, don't get me wrong, but I think this is the one game, though, of the two matchups where I sit here and I go, at least you're in your own house. You're at Soldier Field. Like, if there's something weird that can go right in the Bears' favor, it's going to be this game instead of the one that's played up at US Bank in a handful of weeks. So I still think the Vikings have the edge, but I think this is going to be a low-scoring game. I've got a 2017 final with the Vikings edging out the Bears.
And I'm going the opposite. I'm calling my shot here. I just have a feeling about this one. Vikings have a history of blowing games at Soldier Field. They do. Going back to the Jay Cutler years, even. There were times where the Bears were heavy underdogs at Soldier Field, and they won. I see something similar happening here. I'm saying 24-21 Bears, and not a high-scoring game, right? Like, that's reasonable. It's only a few more points than the game against the Packers. It will require a lot of Caleb, but I think that after last week, I think there's a big shot of confidence. Because, like, that Packers defense wasn't nobody. He looked good against that defense. He was slinging the thing around. Like, that was the most confident we've seen him. I think it gets better from here, even though Brian Flores terrifies me. Like, I have nightmares about Brian Flores sometimes. He's that good of a defensive coordinator. I wish he was a Bears defensive coordinator, but that's something different. I think if, at the very least, the spread's 3.5 on this. I'm betting the Bears to cover this week. I think this is going to be a fun game. And I think ultimately I'm taking the quarterback that I trust more in this game. And I trust Caleb Williams more than Sam Darnold.
If the Bears come back and win on Sunday after the very optimistic performance that Caleb and the offensive coordinator had last Sunday, we're about to go right back all in, aren't we?
1,000%.
I mean, it's going to happen. I'm already thinking the scenario in my head right now. It's like, hold up. If we can beat an 8-2 Minnesota Vikings team, a team right atop of the division with Detroit, there's nobody we can't beat. And all of a sudden, I'm going to convince myself one more time, hey, Caleb's going to get better every single week. Slowly. It was Waldron that was the issue. And here we go again.
I mean, I just look at it and say, like, the 3 weeks before last week, the defense was probably pretty easy to sit there and say, well, yeah, they didn't score any points. This past week, it's hard for the defense to look themselves in the mirror and say, that wasn't my fault. They could put it on the kicker if they want, but they gave up a 4-play touchdown drive within the last 5 minutes of the game. That falls on you at some degree. And I think we have adults in that. The Bears have adults in that room. I think they have guys like Jalen Johnson is all about holding himself and his teammates accountable. We've seen that throughout this year, whether that be verbally or elsewhere. But I think this defense is going to have a nice game this week. I know I had them giving up 21. I don't think 21's bad, especially against a Kevin O'Connell offense. But, like, I think this might be one of the weeks where we see the team actually all sides of the football playing well together, which is I'm excited for. And I hope I'm right, because if not, it'll suck.
If not, we'll be very sad here on Sunday night.
Yeah. But do you guys have any final thoughts you want to get out there before we close this thing up?
Just let Caleb do his thing. That's the season at this point. Obviously I'm joking around earlier about, thinking that we're right back into it, but I missed the post game again, but I sent a message in the chat while you guys did such a fantastic job with that post game. I didn't feel good about that loss, but I felt better compared to the previous 3 weeks. And that's because I saw Caleb Williams develop into a quarterback that could eventually lead us to a Super Bowl. And right now, that's my only goal of this year. Yeah, I don't see the playoffs happening anymore, obviously, with the division the way it looks. But what was so disheartening from the previous 3 weeks was not only did our team look bad, but Caleb was looking bad. And then it seemed like everything was a waste. If we lose, a few of these games moving forward, which we probably obviously will, but Caleb is getting better, honestly, by the end of the year, I'm not going to be all that upset.
Ron, any thoughts?
I just want to see some kind of marginal build from Caleb of what he did on Sunday. I think the moxie of the screaming at Eberflus to go for it on 4th down and then holding up his end of the bargain and converting, and we saw that last drive to put them in field goal range. Just more of that, and I'll be happy no matter what the score says.
I just gotta want to see him continue to trust his playmakers. That was the first game where we saw him throw some trust throws, maybe out of necessity, but they worked out well. And I think that he did a nice job of placing every one of those throws where his guy could get it or at least prevent it from becoming a turnover. That trust builds, and I want to see it continue to build. And I think this offense can move in the right direction with hopefully Thomas Brown pulling the right strings to make it work. But fellas, why don't we get out of here the only way we know how and hope for a Bears victory?
Bear down, gents.
Bear down.